Now we are entering into the second, the most important personality in the history of not only the Mauryas, but in the history of India as well. He is Ashoka the Great. Ashoka, the name Ashoka, the one who is without sorrows, the literal meaning. Ashoka has been regarded not only as the greatest among the Mauryas, but one can say that he is one of the greatest among all the emperors who have ruled in the history of this world. He was the son of Bindusara, who succeeded Chandragupta Maurya, but who ruled for about 20 years. But then we do not have much information with regard to the rule of Bindusara. However, his death in 273. So, the coming of Ashoka as the ruler of the Mauryan Empire. Now, what is the significance of the rule of Ashoka? Ashoka has been called as Devanam Priya and Priya Darshi Raja. He has been called as a Devanam Priya and Priya Darshi Raja. What does it mean? Devanam Priya, beloved of gods, Priyadarshi Raja, pleasing to look at. So, these are the two names. Maybe they are considered as the titles of Ashoka, because he did not have any other titles other than these two. He did not call himself as Chakravarti, neither as Ekorath, nor as Samrat, nothing like that. But he called simply himself as Devanam Priya or Priyadarshi Raja. So these very names of Ashoka suggest what kind of person he was. But then, how did Ashoka call himself as Devanam Priya or Priyadarshi Raja? If you look at the history of Ashoka, the background in which he came to the throne after the death of his father, we find there is a lot of you can say churning in the life of Ashoka. Because Ashoka, when Ashoka succeeded to the throne, his accession to the throne was not peaceful. Why it was not peaceful? The Ceylonese chronicles, Mahavamso, refers to Ashoka as Chandashoka. Chandashoka, cruel Ashoka. But later on, in the later part of his life, He is referred as Dharmashoka. From Chandashoka, he was called as Dharmashoka. That means there was a great amount of transformation in the life of Ashoka, where from cruelty he had pursued pity, kindness, mercy. So, this character itself suggests that Ashoka is really Devanampriya and he was Priyadarshi Raja. My dear students, you must have studied about the early life of Ashoka. The circumstances that led to one of the greatest battle that was fought in the history of the world, as some scholars say, the Battle of Kalinga. Now, before the Battle of Kalinga, his cruelty could be seen even at the time of his accession. It is said that Ashoka ascended the throne after killing his 99 brothers. After killing 99 brothers, he walked on to the throne, which shows that he was very greedy of power. He was very cruel in his character, and thus he was not at all a good man. Now, having ascended the throne, after eliminating his 99 brothers, Ashoka decided to extend his empire. Bindusara died in 273, but the actual coronation of Ashoka took place in the year 269. Maybe these 3 years were being spent by Ashoka to put down his brothers who were been challenging his right over the throne. Now, from 269 onwards, Ashoka decided to extend his empire by his conquest. Now, even for that matter, Ashoka did not have to fight many wars, because a vast empire was being bequeathed to him by Bindusara, by his grandfather Chandragupta Maurya. So, he did not have to fight many wars, but then he had to fight one war to establish himself as an emperor. So, his imperialistic character has come to the fore immediately after he ascended the throne, and therefore he decided to fight a war against such a kingdom which had shown self-respect, which had shown arrogance, and which had shown determination. So, it was this particular attitude of that one particular state which made Ashoka to fight one of the most important war in his life, perhaps the only war in his life, that is the Battle of Kalinga. Battle of Kalinga. So, what is this Battle of Kalinga? Now, which state was called as Kalinga? Kalinga corresponds to the present coastal state of Orissa. From the time of Chandragupta Maurya itself, Kalinga remained an unconquered state. It was a powerful republic inhabited by the very self-respecting people who would never give up their self-respect. It was a state which was very, very prosperous also. It is said that Kalinga had trade contacts with the Southeast Asian countries. Huge amount of wealth and prosperity was there in Kalinga, and therefore Ashoka decided that if he conquers this particular state of Kalinga, it would enhance his economic power, and therefore he decided to fight a war against Kalinga. And this battle of Kalinga took place in the year 261 BC. A very important date, might come for chronological order, which will be normally asked. Therefore, the students are advised to make note of this particular date. Though I don't want to burden you with a number of dates and names, but then whichever is important, that we should make note of it for the purpose of our studies. Now, Battle of Kalinga. It is said that Ashoka's order to surrender was not followed by the state of Kalinga, and therefore he had to fight a war. A fierce war began, and we find there were huge number of casualties in the war. A war is nothing but a distraction. Whether you win or lose, there will be loss of men, money and material. Same thing has happened in the case of the Battle of Kalinga, fought by Ashoka and the state of Kalinga. It is said that in the fierce battle that fought at Kalinga, more than 1 lakh people perished. More than 1.5 lakh people were being imprisoned or captured, and many more of these numbers were being injured. So this particular war, which is considered as one of the fiercest wars that were being fought in the history of ancient world, now became or provided a turning point for Ashoka. We do not know whether Ashoka personally led his forces against the Kalingans. Though king is the supreme commander of the armed forces, he is not necessarily leading the armies into the battlefield. He is staying in the camp and he is getting the feedback about the happenings in the battlefield. Same thing might have happened in the case of Ashoka also. He must be getting the information of the course of the battle from his tent. Even though many days have been passed, there was no good news from the war front. The Kalingans had fought heroically, and the victory must have swung on either way. But finally, we find Ashoka was able to win this war. Now, this was a very hard fought victory. And maybe Ashoka was thinking of celebrating it, just as when the hard fought victory in a cricket match is being celebrated. Ashoka also wanted to celebrate, and to do that, he comes to the battlefield. Sitting on the horseback, he is having a look all around the battlefield. What he sees? We can find that there were countless people who have lost their lives. Their dead bodies scattered here and there and everywhere. There were a large number of soldiers who were being screaming for their lives, having seriously injured. And added to that, there were a large number of children who have been rendered orphans because they lost their fathers. And there were a large number of women who were being crying and cursing Emperor Ashoka, for they have lost their husbands in the battlefield. So, when this was the scene that he is seeing around, he was being stunned. His heart began to melt, and he was being totally upset, and began to ask a question for himself. Is it worth to earn fame by committing violence? Is it worth to earn fame by shedding blood? Is it worth to earn fame by conquering with the help of the sword? So all these questions began to arise in his mind, and he decided. He felt so remorse that he was been looking for some kind of counseling, and finally he decided that violence is not the answer for any problem. He decided at that moment itself that I will not fight war anymore. And hence he decided to give up war altogether, and hence the Battle of Kalinga became the first and the last war of his life. He gave up. The Digvijayas and he pursued Dharma Vijaya, conquering the hearts of the people with love. He gave up Vihara Yatras and began to pursue Dharma Yatras. Vihara Yatras, tours for joy. Instead of that, you conquer the hearts of the people. You conquer the hearts of the people by undertaking what you call tours or the travels to understand their problems, their grievances, and try to solve the problems that are disturbing the people, the subjects. So we find Ashoka totally became a transformed man after the Battle of Kalinga, and at this moment he was being attracted by the teachings or the principles of Buddha, and he decided to become a Buddhist, and at the instance of one Buddhist monk by name Upagupta, Ashoka converted into Buddhism. So he became a Buddhist. Having became a Buddhist, now he decided to spread the message of Buddha, that is the Dharma, to his subjects. Now, how to spread the message of Dharma or righteousness to the subjects? Ashoka felt that his subjects should follow the virtues. He wanted to spread the Dharma, but according to him, Dharma is not a religion as such. No doubt that he became a Buddhist after the Kalinga War, but then he did not want to identify his religion with that of the religion of his subjects. He was being attracted by the principle of Dharma that was preached by Buddha. What is Dharma then? Dharma means righteousness, the law of piety, which consists of the virtues which Ashoka wanted his subjects to inculcate. What are these virtues? The virtues are very simple ones. They don't cost you much. They are the basics that has to be followed by the various sections of the society. Which are the virtues that Ashoka had preached to the subjects? He said the parents should be given respect by the children. The children should obey the parents and respect the teachers. What a value that was preached by Ashoka. We should always speak the truth, truthfulness. Buddha taught that. Truthfulness. Always to speak the truth. Then, to show kindness to men and animals. You be kind to not only men but also to the animals because they have life in them. So, non-violence. He preached non-violence to his subjects. Then, do not treat your subordinates with contempt. Your fellow beings with contempt. Love them. Have good neighborly relationship. So all these are the virtues that were being preached by Ashoka, which constitute the essence of the Dharma that he understood. So, these virtues, he insisted on the subjects, and therefore we find he had issued a number of edicts so that he would be able to reach them to his subjects. Ashoka issued a number of edicts to spread his message. We find Ashokan edicts were being found all over his empire. There were different types of edicts. Now, what are these edicts? Edicts means the orders, usually the orders issued by the rulers. A number of edicts were being issued by Ashoka, which were being found in various parts of his empire. Now, in Karnataka also, we find Ashoka's edicts are being found in large numbers. Which are the places that we find Ashokan edicts in Karnataka? Maski in Raichur district, Gavi Mata, Palkigundu in Koppal district, Siddhapura, Jatinga Rameshwara, in Chitradurga district, Nittur and Udayagolla in Ballari district, and Sannati in Gulbarga district. Today it is in Yadgir district, Sannati in Gulbarga district or Yadgir district. So, these are the various places where Ashokan edicts are being found in Karnataka. These edicts, which were found in various parts of Karnataka, except in Maski edict, in all these edicts, Ashoka has been referred as either Devanam Priya or Priyadarshi Raja. And hence there is a doubt among the scholars with regard to the authorship of these edicts. Are these edicts issued by Ashoka or someone else? However, with confirming the name of Ashoka in the Maski edict, where it is referred as Devanam Piyasa Asokasa. Devanam Piyasa Asokasa. It was confirmed that Devanam Priya and Priyadarshi Raja is none other than Ashoka. Devanam Piyasa Asokasa. Thus says the beloved of gods, Ashoka embudagi, Ashoka is its meaning. So, beloved of gods Ashoka says like this. That is the meaning of this, which has settled the issue with regard to the authorship of these edicts. Now, these edicts were been written in either Prakrit language Greek or Greek language, is also written in Sanskrit language, sorry, Pali language. So, these edicts were either in Prakrit or Pali or in Greek language. They were, the script used in writing these edicts was either Brahmi script or the Kharoshthi script. Kharoshthi script. Kharoshthi script was a script used in the region of Gandhara. So, it was called as the Gandhari Prakriti. This script was called as the Gandhari Prakriti. Now, till 1831, we find the script, the Brahmi script, was not deciphered by anyone. It was very difficult to understand the script used by Ashoka in composing these edicts. It was in 1831 that a British scholar by name James Prinsep successfully deciphered the Brahmi script, and hence we find for the first time we were able to study about the Mauryas, about one of the greatest of the emperors of the world, Ashoka. If scholar James Prinsep was not able to decipher the Brahmi script, I think we would not have been able to study about Ashoka or able to know about the history of the great Mauryas. So, this is as far as Ashoka is concerned. Ashoka built a very vast empire. His empire was extended from Kashmir to Sindh in the north, to Afghanistan and Balochistan in the west. In the east, it was extended up to Bengal, and in the south, it had reached as far as Suvarnagiri. Suvarnagiri was one of the important provinces under Ashoka, and Ashoka had appointed Dharma Mahamatras, the special officers in various provinces and also in the other administrative units in the provinces to carry on the duty of spreading the Dharma and also to supervise the spiritual life of his subjects. Ashoka has been regarded as one of the greatest emperors in the world because he built a very vast empire, and for this very vast empire he provided a very efficient system of administration which was based on the principles of Arthashastra of Kautilya. He gave a paternalistic form of administration, a father-like rule to his subjects. Though he was converted to Buddhism, he was tolerant towards all the other religions. He did not forcibly impose his religion on his subjects. And his view was very clear about the religions. He preached tolerance. He says, the one who with an excessive love towards his own religion insults other religions, insults his own. The one who with excessive love towards his religion insults other religions, insults his own. This is what Ashoka says about the tolerance. He gives importance to tolerance, and he wanted his subjects to live harmoniously with a sense of brotherhood with each other. Ashoka, having converted to Buddhism, decided to spread Buddhism in various parts of his empire and also in other countries. His contribution towards Buddhism is remarkable. What are the measures that he had taken for the spread of Buddhism? First and foremost, we find he visited all the places connected with the life of Buddha. Which are the places connected with the life of Buddha? The place where he was born, Lumbini Vana. The kingdom that he belonged, Kapilavastu. Then the place where he got the enlightenment, Bodh Gaya. Then the place where he gave his first sermon, that is Deer Park in Saranath. And then the place where he died, Kushinagar. So all these places he visited, and there he arranged religious discourses. Second, he issued a number of edicts and engraved the teachings of the principles of Buddhism on the pillars, on the rocks, and on the walls of the caves. Then he sent missionaries to various countries. He sent the missionaries to Tibet, he sent the missionaries to China, he sent them to Ceylon and Afghanistan, then Europe, Greece. So all these countries, we find he sent his missionaries because Buddhism was a missionary religion. It is carried, or it was being spread by the efforts of the monks who were called as the missionaries. They went to these countries and spread the principles of Buddhism. Then he sent his own son and daughter, son Mahendra and daughter Sangamitra, to Ceylon with the sapling of a Bodhi tree and gave the peace message in Ceylon as well, or today's Sri Lanka. Then Ashoka undertook the various welfare measures for his subjects. He constructed roads, he built the canals, he planted the shade and fruit bearing trees, then he built the inns or the rest houses for the travelers, he built schools, and he set up hospitals for both men as well as the animals. And thus we find he did everything possible for the welfare of his subjects. So through his efforts, he was able to spread Buddhism not only all over the country, but also in the various foreign countries. Perhaps the greatest contribution of Ashoka to Buddhism was the summoning of the third Buddhist council at Pataliputra. So, in the year 250 BCE, we find Ashoka summoned the fourth Buddhist council in order to settle some of the disputes that arose among the monks, Buddhist monks. So, these are the contributions of Ashoka to Buddhism. Now, with regard to the estimate, as I have told you, Ashoka gave up war altogether following the Battle of Kalinga. He is the first emperor, first king in the history of the world to give up war altogether after a brilliant victory. So, it was not a very simple victory at Kalinga. As I told you, Ashoka wanted to celebrate it, but instead of celebrating, he felt a remorse about the scenes that he found all around the battlefield and decided to give up war altogether. So, there is no example in the history of the world that a ruler giving up a war after such a brilliant victory. Though we have number of instances where defeat after defeat, one gives up his intention of conquering a particular state, or it is just like the cricketers who fail one after another, fail in every match, then finally giving up in order to give way for the younger players. That is what they say. But Ashoka is altogether a different character. He gave up war altogether after a brilliant victory. So, to conclude, it is important to recall the quote from the great historian H.G. Wells with regard to Ashoka. He says, amidst tens and thousands of the names of the monarchs that crowd the columns of history, their majesties, royal highness and the like, the name of Ashoka shines and shines, almost alone like a star. So, there is no comparison to Ashoka. There is no person who can stand in comparison to Ashoka. Ashoka is the greatest and he is the first, and there is no other person who can take his place. So, this is the great tribute that has been paid by the British historian H.G. Wells with regard to the personality of Ashoka. So, we have studied enough about the political history of the Mauryas with a detailed discussion on Ashoka. Now, after Ashoka, his son Thamprati Chandragupta succeeded to the throne. But then very soon we find the Mauryan dynasty or Mauryan empire began to decline. Various reasons have been attributed or causes have been attributed to the rapid decline of the Mauryas. So, if an empire has to decline, there are certain common causes behind them. The first one is you have an extensive empire, but you have incapable ruler at the helm. Second, the frequent invasions or the revolts, invasions from outsiders, revolts from within. So, this will also weaken the authority of the ruler and lead to the downfall of the empire. In the case of the Mauryas, it is also stated that the very principle of non-violence that was imbibed among the soldiers might be responsible for the decline of the Mauryan Empire. Ashoka, after the Kalinga battle, stopped fighting any wars. And when you stop fighting any war means you don't have work for the soldiers. And when you don't have the wars to fight, naturally we find that the army will become lethargic. And there is no chivalry lasting among the quality of chivalry lasting among the soldiers. So, it might have been one of the reasons for the downfall of the Mauryan Empire. The last ruler of the Mauryan Empire, Mauryan dynasty, was Brihadratha, who was defeated by his own general Pushyamitra Sunga, who laid the foundation and began the rule of the Sunga dynasty. So that was the end of the Mauryan dynasty. Now, my dear students, we should study about the contributions of the Mauryas. The Mauryas established a vast empire, and they have provided a very good administration to this vast empire, introducing what you call uniform laws which were made applicable all over the empire. We find in the administration there were two levels. One is the central administration or central government, and the other one was at the provincial level, provincial administration. At the central level, we find the king was the hub of administration. He concentrated all the powers in his hands. He was the head of he had the legislative, executive, and the judicial as well as the military powers with him. He was been following dharma and the principles of Arthashastra in carrying out the administration. In order to assist him, there was a council of ministers or Mantri Parishad consisting of a number of ministers taking care of different departments. These ministers were being appointed carefully, studying about their qualifications, the capacities and the abilities, and they will hold the office of their ministry as long as the king wishes. Though their advice was been taken, but then the ruler was not bound to follow the advice, and he can take his own decision. Then you have the judicial administration. The king was the highest judicial officer of the state. He was the highest court of appeal. There were a number of courts, both at the provincial level and at the central level as well as the provincial level. Two types of courts we can see during the time of the Mauryas. One was known as Dharmastheya, dealing with the civil cases. The other one was called as the Kantaka Shodhana, dealing with the criminal cases. We find punishments were being very severe. Though Ashoka had followed the policy of non-violence, or he did not, he was not inclined towards violence. But then, as per the situation, punishments were also very severe, as it was been mentioned by Megasthenes in his work Indica. The punishments like life imprisonment and also the mutilation of limbs was being followed. So there was fear among the people that crimes will invite the severe punishment for them. With regard to the revenue administration, the land revenue was the most important source of income to the state. 1/6 of the produce was being the share of the state as the form of in the form of land revenue, which could be paid both in cash and kind. And we can find taxes of various items were being levied. There was profession tax, house tax or property tax. There was tax on the cattle, livestock. Then you have a number of other taxes on the forest products, sales tax, etc., which were the constant source of revenue to the state. At the provincial level, the empire was being divided into provinces. During the time of Ashoka, there were 5 provinces which were being under either the family members of the ruler, governed by the family members of the ruler, or they were being given to those who were being close to the ruler. Now 5 provinces such as Girnar in Gujarat, then you have Taxila, presently in Pakistan, then you have another province at Tosali, that is in Orissa, then Ujjain in Madhya Pradesh, then of course Suvarnagiri in Karnataka. So the rule of the Mauryas was extended up to Karnataka or Suvarnagiri is evident from the fact that Ashoka had appointed Dharma Mahamatras at the central and also at the provincial level. We find the provinces were divided into districts which were being managed or administered by the Sthanikas. Districts were being divided into villages and the Gramani was being the head of the village. 10 villages were being grouped together and they were being given in charge of Gopa, and the administration was being carried out efficiently. You have the city administration. What was the city administration during the time of the Mauryas? The accounts of Megasthenes gives an idea how the administration of the cities was being carried out. He makes a reference to the city administration of Pataliputra, where he says that there was a 30-member committee that looked after the entire administration of the city of Pataliputra. And these 30 members were being grouped into 6 boards with 5 members each. And these boards were being entrusted with the responsibilities of different nature. So, to take care of the irrigation, education, then you have the markets, the roads, the temples, and the like, were the responsibility of these boards which were being set up to look after the administration of Pataliputra. The same arrangement was been made in other cities also. Coming to the military administration. What was the military administration? How was it? The Mauryas had a very powerful army. And this huge army, consisting of various wings, it is said that 6 lakh infantry, 30,000 cavalry. This was the huge army that the Mauryas had possessed. Now there were 6 boards to look after the entire administration, entire military administration. And these 6 boards with 5 members each were being formed to see that all the wings of the army would be given equal importance. Which are the boards in the army? There was infantry, foot soldiers, cavalry, war horses, elephants, then you have chariots, then you have transport and navy. So all these 6 wings of the army were being looked after by these 6 boards, and we find there was a very good and efficient army which was built by the Mauryas. Then finally, art and architecture. The Mauryas were the first to give a very lasting examples of architecture. They built several buildings, palaces, stupas, monuments and pillars which were found all over their empire. Now with regard to the stupas, till the time of Ashoka, we find in the construction wood and the bricks were used. Wood and bricks will not give a longevity for the buildings. So naturally we find from the time of Ashoka, wood and bricks were being replaced by stone. And as a result, we find the monuments that were built from the time of Ashoka have remained or lasted for a long time. Among the monuments that were being built by the Mauryas, the most important are the stupas. Stupas are the dome-like structures which were built either on the remains of Buddha or they are built in honor of Buddha. So these monuments, the stupas, having a dome-like shape, are the finest architecture that belong to the Mauryan dynasty. They are Buddhist monuments. The relics of Buddha are being preserved in these monuments, which gives it sanctity. It is said that Ashoka built more than 84,000 stupas in various parts of his empire. Of course, all these stupas did not survive. They have been destroyed by the forces of nature over the centuries. But then there is one stupa that attracts the attention of the visitors, and that is the Sanchi Stupa. The Sanchi Stupa is the biggest of all the stupas that were built by Ashoka. Sanchi Stupa in Madhya Pradesh. Then palaces. Of course, you don't have many palaces that belong to the Mauryas, but then there is one palace at Pataliputra which has remained in ruins, which was been noticed by Fahiyan, the Chinese pilgrim who visited India during the time of the Guptas, Chandragupta II, Vikramaditya. So, he was being surprised to see this beautiful palace, the way it was being built. And he says in his work, Gokoki, that this was the creation of gods. ದೇವರ ಸೃಷ್ಟಿ ಎಂಬುದಾಗಿ ಆತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾನೆ. So, such a beautiful building it was, as Fahiyan says. Then you have the caves. Caves are dug out of hard rocks, and these caves were being dug out in order to provide a shelter to the Buddhist monks to meditate. And we find number of caves were being built by the Mauryas, especially by Ashoka and his grandson Dasharatha, which are found in the mountains near Gaya and in the Nagarjuna hills. Then of course you have the pillars. Pillars are one of the most important contributions of the Mauryas. We can find during the time of Ashoka about 30 pillars were being erected by Ashoka in various parts of his empire. Now these pillars spread the message of dharma or the law of piety, not only to the people of India but also to the entire world. It is said that Ashoka erected about 30 pillars during his time, and each pillar weighs about 50 tons and rises up to 30 feet in height. The pillars of Ashoka has the three parts. One is the topmost part, where we find the abacus is placed, and then you have the four lines facing four directions. So that particular part. Then you have the middle part below that abacus up to the ground, and then of course the bottom part, which is dug deep into the earth. Now, at the top of this pillar, one can see the inverted lotus. The inverted lotus on which there is an abacus where you have the four animals, elephant, the bull, the lion and the horse in galloping posture. In between these there are the smaller dharma chakras, and over that you have the four lions seated back to back facing four directions, and these four lions give a message. What do they stand for? So these four lions facing four directions symbolize the power, the pride, the courage and the confidence. So these are the four symbols that four lions stand for. Then you have the Dharma Chakra. Dharma Chakra gives the message that there is progress, there is truth and progress, and you have one quote written there which reads Satya Meva Jayate. Satya Meva Jayate. Truth alone triumphs. Satya Meva Jayate, which has been derived from the Mundaka Upanishad. The message is apt, as we find Ashoka insisted all should speak the truth, and truth only triumphs. The most important of all these Ashoka pillars is seen at Saranath. So Saranath pillar is the most important among all the pillars that were erected by Ashoka, and it is apt that we find the topmost part of this pillar has been adopted by Free India as the national emblem of our country. So if you want to know or see clearly what exactly is the national emblem of our country, you take out a coin from your pocket and just go through it carefully. All these will be visible except among the four lions, one lion is not visible, and all the other things will be visible for you. So this is as far as the Mauryan contribution is concerned. Now there is another small topic, and that is on the Shatavahanas. The Shatavahanas succeeded the Mauryas in the southern part of India. It is said that the Shatavahanas had originally from Andhra Pradesh, because in the inscriptions they are being referred as the Andhra Bhratyas or Andhra Jatiyas. However, it was established that the Shatavahanas are from Maharashtra. They ruled for about 400 years, built a very vast empire which spread even beyond the Vindhyas and extended up to the northwestern part of India. The founder of this dynasty, was Simukha. He is also called as Raya Simukha. Their capital was Paithan. Pratisthana, which is called today as a Paithan in Maharashtra. We find there are a few important rulers in this dynasty. King Hala, the 17th ruler, 17th ruler of this dynasty, was a great conqueror who had led successful expeditions in the Deccan and also led his armies in Ceylon. And he was also a great scholar who wrote a book called as Gata Saptasati. Gata Saptasati in Prakrit language. Prakrit was the official language of the Shatavahanas, and in this particular language, King Hala wrote this work, Gata Saptasati. However, the greatest among the Shatavahanas was Gautami Putra Shatakarni. Gautami Putra Shatakarni. Who ruled from 106 to 130 CE. Before Gautamiputra ascended the throne, we find the Shatavahanas had already disappeared, practically disappeared from the political scene, because there were so many foreign attacks from the Sakas, the Yavanas, the Pallavas from the northwestern part of India. However, things have changed once Gautamiputra Shatakarni ascended the throne. He not only expelled these foreign powers from his country, he made a number of additions to his empires. He has established his sway over entire South India and chased out the Sakas, the Pallavas and the Yavanas. During the 18th regnal year, we find he had defeated the Saka ruler Nahapana, and his son-in-law Usavadatta, and thus liberated the entire northwestern part of India from the influence of these foreign tribes. Having conquered the vast region, which is surrounded by the three seas, he held a title called Tri Samudra Toya Pitavahana. Tri Samudra Toya Pitavahana was a title which was assumed by Gautamiputra Shatakarni, indicating that he had become the lord of the land that is surrounded by the three seas. Three seas. Which are the three seas? You have the Arabian Sea in the west, you have the Bay of Bengal in the east, and the Indian Ocean in the south. These are the three seas that surrounded his empire. And all these details about his achievements have been given in the Nasik cave inscription that was issued by his mother Gautami Balasiri. So, it is a very important source on the achievements of her son Gautamiputra Shatakarni, the conquest that he had undertaken and the military exploits that he had accomplished. Now, with regard to the cultural contributions of the Shatavahanas, we find the Shatavahanas were great patrons of art and architecture. They promoted Prakrit, and we find a number of works were being written in Prakrit language. Gunadhya, another scholar at the time, wrote Brahat Katha, which is not there in your textbook. Then they also promoted art and architecture. Though they were the followers of Vedic religion, we find that they had encouraged other religions also. Jainism and also Buddhism drew attention from the Shatavahana rulers, and as a result we find a large number of Buddhist monuments could be found all over the empire of the Shatavahanas in the form of the stupas, the viharas and the chaityas. These are the three types of Buddhist monuments which were built by the Shatavahanas in the various parts of their empire. So a few can be made mention here. The places like architectural centers of the Shatavahanas. You have one Karle, Kaneri, these are in Andhra Pradesh, Kaneri, Nasik, Maharashtra, Karle, Kaneri, Nasik. Then you have Amaravati and Nagarjunikonda. There are many others also, but these are enough for your information. Karle, Kaneri, Nasik, Amaravati and Nagarjunikonda. These are very famous for the stupas that were built by the Shatavahanas. You find these are a few important contributions of the Shatavahanas as the successors of the Mauryas in South India. So this is on the Mauryas and the Shatavahanas. Thank you very much for watching.